And for that, we pledge everyone's support. We'd like to, solicit your support as well. And if you could please all get behind this project. If you'd like to find out more about that, you're quite happy to contact me, send us a message, and we will pass on all the message to you. But right now, let's get on for some of the news for today. First of all, let's take a look at the top stories.
Here are the top stories on ABC News. Missing 5-year-old Grace Hughes has been found. Northern Territory Police say the young girl is receiving a medical check but is physically in good health. Grace and her mother Laura Hings had been missing since the 7th of August when she was abducted from the Berrimah area after a supervised parental visit. Indonesia's ambassador has refused to comment on a decision to reduce the prison sentence for the bomb maker behind the 2002 Bali terror attacks. Umar Patek was sentenced to more than 20 years in prison for his role in the bombings that killed 202 people, including 88 Australians. He's now been granted a 5-month reduction, which could mean he would be freed on parole later this month. The Victorian branch of the Australian Medical Association is calling for more funding as the state's health system buckles under the pressure of the pandemic. It follows reports of patients being treated in tents and hallways. The association says capacity at hospitals needs to be increased before the next wave of the pandemic. 4-time AFL Premiership winning coach Alistair Clarkson is set to join North Melbourne as head coach. The 54-year-old was courted by the Kangaroos, the Bombers and the Giants after leaving Hawthorn last year. Clarkson has agreed to a 5-year deal with the Kangaroos but faces an uphill task to return the club to success.
Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen, on this weekend edition with Australian Indian Radio. And of course, this week there's been a lot that's been happening, but as I mentioned before, that about the Krishna Janmashtami, and yesterday, what an amazing event held by ISKCON. Really well organized, and it is so good to see so many people turn up for the Krishna Janmashtami. After COVID, I think that's one of the largest gathering of this nature for Krishna Janmashtami that I've seen. Of course, last weekend we had the India Day Fair, and again, massive crowd there as well. Right now, moving on, what else has been making news? Our ex-Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. So let's take a look at that report, how he got sewn into multiple portfolios.
7 is the biggest single increase in cases in a 24-hour.
Australians overseas urged to get home quickly.
A level 4 travel restriction to the entire world.
Life is changing in Australia as it is changing all around the world. Life is going to continue to change.
March 18, 2020, a truly dramatic day in the lives of Australians. With a COVID death toll spiralling globally and unprecedented uncertainty about what lay ahead, the Australian government made some momentous calls, notably shutting us off from the rest of the world. Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced Federal Cabinet's National Security Committee had made a number of decisions.
One of those has been enacted this morning by the Governor-General, and that is that a human biosecurity emergency was declared under the Biosecurity Act by the Governor-General, and that regards the recognition of the threat, the coronavirus, and the need for the federal government to take actions under the Health Minister and myself as Prime Minister in relation to limiting that spread.
But what Australians didn't know, and it turns out what his colleagues didn't know, was that Scott Morrison had done something else unprecedented that day. He had got the Governor-General to appoint him as a second Minister for Health. The argument was, if Health Minister Greg Hunt was struck down by COVID, there would be someone to sign the powerful biosecurity directives which enabled actions such as closing the country's borders.
Deep in the Morrison government's Sydney offices, cleaners in biohazard suits get to work.
You can sort of understand the alarm. This was 5 days after Defence Minister Peter Dutton had become the first Cabinet Minister to test positive for COVID. It's not unusual for ministers to act temporarily on behalf of other ministers, but this was a case of the PM being formally appointed to these portfolios as minister. As far as we know, these appointments were never revoked. Even more extraordinary, these appointments were kept secret. Greg Hunt was told the PM was shadowing him, But Finance Minister and close Morrison ally Matthias Cormann says he was not told the PM had also appointed himself Finance Minister. Resources Minister Keith Pitt also only found out he had a government shadow when his authority to run his own portfolio was directly challenged. And 730 understands the former PM may have held 4 to 5 portfolios in addition to his own.
Have you been on the tools before?
I've done this before. This edge here?
Yeah, you gotta do it.
And we'll do like a little circular motion.
Oh, okay. There we go. I'm not pretending to be anyone else.
Scott Morrison may have tried his hand in front of the cameras at all sorts of jobs as PM. The man who signed off on these secret ministerial jobs, Governor-General David Hurley, seemed to suggest today they were nothing out of the ordinary. Through a spokesperson, he said the appointments had been made, quote, following normal process and acting on the advice of the government of the day. The spokesperson said questions, quote, around appointments of this nature are a matter for the government of the day and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, as was the decision on whether to publicise such appointments. The current Prime Minister does not seem to have quite such a sanguine view.
In Australia, we have a Westminster system of government that produces accountability. This is a sort of tin pot activity that we would ridicule if it was in a non-democratic country.
Anthony Albanese's remarks today and his request for a legal briefing on the revelations reflect the deadly serious implications of these appointments for both accountability and the exposure of the Commonwealth to legal action. Ministers in a range of portfolios from immigration to national security to health and the environment have huge discretionary powers. Our system of government is supposed to ensure both accountability for their decisions and that there are the checks and balances of a cabinet system to stop unilateral action.
Most of the time when ministers use their power, they will do it within limits agreed by the government, by cabinet. So very seldom would a minister, I suspect, make a very controversial decision without having confirmed within the government that this was the way they wanted to go. In these instances, we've got two ministers perhaps not knowing both, one of them not knowing the other is there, who can make different decisions on the same issue, both with ministerial authority. And that makes a complete mess up of any notion of accountability to the Parliament or to the electorate about who is making these decisions.
If a government makes a decision via a minister, which can be challenged in the court, what happens if two ministers in the same portfolio come to opposite conclusions?
I've taken that decision directly as Prime Minister.
Resources Minister Keith Pitt was widely understood to have been supportive of an exploration project known as PEP 11 continuing off the New South Wales coast, despite concerns of local MPs. Pitt was worried a decision to stop it could be challenged if it did not follow proper process and was perceived to be influenced by politics. The PM's decision to cancel it shortly before the election, which was legally one for the Minister to make, not the Prime Minister, is now the subject of a judicial review in the Federal Court. Scott Morrison's only response today was a text message to a Sky journalist saying, quote, "Since leaving the job, I haven't engaged in any day-to-day politics." But these revelations have also exposed a potentially major flaw in our system of government, which will now need to be fixed.
Well, there you go, another flaw that really needs to be fixed, and quite a comprehensive report there. What's your view on that? Do you think he acted in the best interest of the country, just in case the health minister or should something happen, but who would then have the power to make that decision in emergency situation? All that being said and done and good, did he need to then advise his team? And the duty of disclosure comes in there as well. And as the Governor-General said, that it was nothing out of the ordinary. The normal procedures had been followed. So there we go. That then leads to the point, which was the concluding point in that report, was that whether the system needs to be fixed and looked at, and if there's any loopholes, covered. Well, right now, of course, energy. So with the energy, of course, we all need energy. Without energy, everything stops. So the source of energy throughout the generations have been different. Whatever mankind could find or invent and mine to get that energy supplies up and running. So everything, when you meddle with nature, there will be consequences, which I have always maintained and which I will always maintain. So, along with all of these ways of producing fuel and energy have always come side effects. Well, right now, the new move is EVs, the electric vehicles. So, now they're on the rise. So, what are the challenges? What would it be? And what strategies need to be put in place now, rather than, way down the track, then we find out, this wasn't looked at, so now it has these consequences. Here's that report.
Demand for electric vehicles has never been higher, but there's a big barrier to owning one.
I paid about 82,000.
Melbourne man Savi was willing to spend big to help fight climate change, but he acknowledges not everyone can.
These electric vehicles are a little bit expensive, but it may be worth on the long run.
Cars account for almost 10% of Australia's emissions, and the federal government wants to make green alternatives cheaper.
The price sends them to petrol or diesel vehicles against their will.
Labor is resurrecting plans for fuel efficiency standards, limiting how much carbon cars can emit and forcing companies to sell more electric vehicles in Australia.
Australia and Russia are really the only developed countries without fuel efficiency standards.
With no risk of punishment for breaching non-existent standards, manufacturers are sending new models overseas.
Australia ends up being a dumping ground for fossil fuel vehicles, and that's really not acceptable. We need to have fuel efficiency standards ourselves.
Increasing supply and competition could make a difference.
Cheaper electric vehicles already exist around the world. They're just often not brought to Australia. So this will help in that case.
But fuel standards are just one reason for a relatively slow uptake.
The whole industry is being impacted by the supply chain, so getting any form of vehicle into Australia at the moment, whether it's combustion engine or an electric vehicle, is quite difficult.
Labor dumped its push for fuel standards before the May election after a former leader was subjected to a scare campaign.
Bill Shorten wants to end the weekend.
3 years later, Liberal frontbenchers say Labor has broken a promise and that fuel standards are a tax by stealth.
Is this a carbon tax?
No.
A taste of the political battle to come. Henry Bello, ABC News, Canberra.
Is it a fuel tax? Is it one of those gimmicks? But the fact of the matter remains that the electric cars are here and they're here to stay, and we'll see more and more of them. One of the big challenges I see is the charging stations. Where can you get them charged or recharged? That is a problem because there's many people who are a bit worried going out on long trips whether they'll get to a charging station or not. Well, we've been told that they can last quite a bit, but again, that problem still is lingering in the back of minds of people. Okay, what if we were driving out somewhere, out bush or something, and all of a sudden we discover we've run out of charge? What do we do then? So, that sense of security which people love is also questionable in terms of the EVs. Well, right now, moving on, let's take a look at the new news, which is thousands which gather for the Monday Bash. This is a great old Australian tradition. Wonderful to see that so many people now turning up for that. Here's a sneak preview.
The band and the dance moves return to the Monday Plains in the New South Wales outback, where the Beds Are Burning music video was filmed 35 years ago. The time has come. It was a midnight oil performance few will forget.
It's just one of the best shows I've ever seen, so if not the best show I've ever seen, it was amazing.
But it wasn't just the big acts capturing the crowd.
Please welcome the Wilcannia Central School Choir.
These Wilcannia Public School students gave Missy Higgins a hand on stage. The weeks of practice paid off.
We've had a couple of Zoom sessions with her, which has been really nice. She's so down to earth. She's amazing with the kids.
It's always really important, like as many local artists as we can get to showcase, the better. I mean, it's so rare that in remote communities like this that local artists get a chance to be on the stage.
While a little rain brought the raincoats out, it was a far cry from Byron Bay's Muddy Splendour in the Grass Festival. It may have been out in the middle of nowhere to some, but more than 8,000 travelled here for the event.
These days, people, the audience, expects more. Not everybody just wants an uncomfortable, sweaty festival experience. You know, they want something different.
A gathering of diesel and dust in the state's red heart. Bill Ormond, ABC News.
The gathering of diesel and dust, good old Aussie tradition. Wonderful to see that the Monday, where the beds are burning, was shot so many years back, and the memory and the legacy still lives on. That is just so wonderful. Well, of course, right here in Australia, there is a lot of cultural aspects as well, which we might not be aware of. So one such aspect is the fishing rights of the indigenous people. So if they're doing the cultural fishing, should they be fined? Here's that report.
It's a beautiful sight, but one that's off limits to Walbundra man John Carriage. Convicted of 6 fishery offences for joint possession of abalone above the legal limit, he's banned from diving for abalone for 2 years.
That's my land, my water, my resources, on land and the water. And I've got to sit back and be a third-class citizen on my own country, on my own land.
Between 2009 and 2015, it's been estimated that close to 500 Aboriginal people have been fined, jailed or had their equipment confiscated for fisheries offences.
Legislation to protect cultural fishing was passed in 2009. 13 years on, it hasn't come into effect.
It looks and smells like systemic discrimination against Aboriginal people.
Abalone groups are supportive of the law, but reiterated their concern about the risk of overfishing.
And they're coming further and further down south because their fishing grounds that they're using are totally destroyed and there's no fish left in that area. So it needs to be tidied up. There needs to be a clear line in the sand.
The agency managing the natural resource base, certainly our preference is to manage cultural fishing within the broader framework of sustainability so that the total take for all of these species is managed sustainably.
The New South Wales government says it supports the rights of cultural fishers, but their position remains unchanged. There can be no review of fishing rights without possession limits. That goes against what Aboriginal fishers called for today. And while the hearings have finished, there's still no agreement on when this law will ever be enacted. Harriet Tatum, ABC News.
And of course, there we go. The two sides of the coin once again. The rights of the Aboriginal people in that fishing, and the number 2 is doing so in a sustainable manner so that there's enough to allow for the growth rather than finishing that off. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you in this segment. But right now, before we move on to our functions and events, let's take a look at the message from our sponsors as well. And of course, we know that tonight is the big show of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. That's happening at Sunpack. If you haven't got your tickets now, please do so. We'd like to see you all there tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I was talking about all the functions and events taking place, here's all the events. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for you in this weekend edition. It's just been so wonderful having your company, and just enjoy the weekend. And don't forget that Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan tribute concert tonight at Sunpack. Please do come, and if you haven't got your tickets yet, tickets are available. Please do so ASAP. We'd like to see you all there tonight. I will be there tonight, so we'll like to see you all there. Until next time, it's goodbye from us.